So welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to today's class. It's a very practical class that brings us right into experiences in the classroom as we look at emotions and critical thinking, because we recognize that emotions are part of who we are. Emotions are part of the classroom environment, and emotions are happening every time we think. So big welcome from Sam and Daniel as we look at the topic of emotions and critical thinking. And today's lesson, we'll be looking at the importance of emotions in thinking and teaching, the emotions wheel, theories of emotions, practical application, emotional intelligence, and then we'll move on and look at the humanities and the arts as subjects that deal with emotions in music, poetry, literature, and storytelling. Let's begin with a Bible reading. And Galatians 5 reminds us that we can walk by the Spirit and not gratify the desires of the fleshly nature, for the desires of the flesh are often against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. So the desires of the flesh, the Apostle Paul lists as immorality, impurity, idolatry, strife, jealousy, anger, rivalry, dissension, and divisions. And then the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And that's what we want as Christian teachers, to have that spirit that brings love and joy and peace into our classrooms. And we see here an illustration of the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians 5. Let's begin with a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the privilege of being a teacher and for the opportunity to make a positive impact on the lives of our students. And we seek to develop skills needed to think and write well and to prepare to teach effectively. We seek your wisdom and guidance for every area of our life, including our emotional life, and we pray grant us wisdom to understand all the needs and abilities of our students and insights to tailor our teaching to help them reach their full potential. As we navigate the challenges of teaching, please give us strength and resilience to overcome challenges and obstacles that we face, and grace to handle all situations, the good and the more difficult, with wisdom and compassion. May your wisdom and love guide us in all we do. Amen. So today we're looking at the importance of emotion, both the positive, uplifting emotions and the more challenging emotions that we feel as we face difficult times and situations. Emotions are often overlooked as an aspect of thinking, and critical and academic thinking, and even in teaching. And when a person is thinking or teaching or learning, they're not just weighing up information or evidence, they're engaging every part of their being. Emotions, relationship, all part of our body existence in this world, are important when we think and when we teach. Emotions too can influence our perceptions, our judgments, our decision-making, and the ways we respond to students and topics. Emotions can influence motivations. When we pursue a topic, when we view a position on a topic, our emotions are attached to it, whether our interest, which is uplifting, or whether there's topics that we avoid. Emotions can motivate us and our students, or they can cause us to avoid topics and students. They can bring biases. How we engage with a topic is related to our biases, that which we like, that which we emotionally are caught up in, and that which we avoid, that which we emotionally are trying to steer away from. And the ways we engage with students is often related to the emotions we feel. If they're positive, cheerful students, we interact emotionally more positively. But if there's negative experiences, this can cause troubles as we interact in various ways. Emotions can cause tunnel vision. Strong emotions can lead to a narrow focus of attention and limit our ability or viewpoints or solutions, or having positive emotions can open up our heart to seeing wider ways of understanding what's going on. Emotions can bring impulsivity, that is, they can cause us to react impulsively in certain ways, and they can also promote more positively critical thinking in our teaching, as emotions encourage us and cheer us up and make us more positive. So we can practice lots of exercises and skills as we seek to be more aware of an understanding of the emotions that we have. Daniel, your thoughts on emotions and their importance in the classroom?
I think they're important, Sam, in the sense that everyone's got them. and inevitably we're going to have to deal with them at some point or another. But one thing I want to stress, I think, today, and it's certainly something we'll look at, is that emotions can actually be a really good thing, because emotions are often where we get our passions from, our interests from. It's what makes us excited to look at particular topics or particular ideas. So when we, sometimes when we hear that phrase, thinking with emotion, sometimes we can, picture a heated, discussion where people are getting too emotional and too invested in, riling each other up. And so I think one of the things that we'll obviously look at today, and certainly the way that I approach this, is saying that emotions can actually be really powerful and a really good thing. Yes, we've all got them, and yes, in our students, it's mindful to be aware of, I think not just the way we interact with them, the way we encourage them, even the way we might manage poor behavior in that sense, but also be aware of what our students are interested in, what they're passionate about. And that doesn't always have to be schoolwork as well. It can be their hobbies, their passions outside of the classroom. And I think we often find that our motivation for being teachers, and in particular, secondary teachers who have a particular, discipline of interest, our interest is born out of our emotion. So it's a good thing. Thinking with emotion can be a really beautiful and wonderful thing, because God has blessed us with that. And that's where we get our passions from. And making students feel seen and acknowledged for their passions is a really crucial part of being a teacher.
And it reminds us that God has made us as a complete person, doesn't it? That is, we have a body, we have a mind, we have thoughts and ideas, but we also have relationships, we have a heart, we have feelings, and our students too have feelings that they bring into the classroom. And the discussion about emotions can take us back in history to ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, who said that emotions can be like a chariot rider, which he said is the sensible thinking person. And then we've got the positive emotions of the white horse that brings those higher thoughts, care and love and compassion and thoughtfulness. And then we've got the black horse as the other horse, the cranky horse that's tied up to the chariot. The philosopher David Hume said that the emotions often govern the way we reason. We think we're reasoning things out, but really it's our subconscious that's governing what we're thinking. Psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud said it's often these subconscious urges that are governing what we're saying and doing, rather than what we think we're logically doing. And often we feel we're making logical decisions, and students feel they're making logical decisions when there's emotional things going on. And so one of the things we can do in the classroom to encourage a greater understanding of emotions is to talk about emotions, to use various ways of understanding emotions. And we can talk about emotions in various subjects, music and art, literature. We can talk about emotions even when we do science. We can say that this is part of what we're made up of. William James was one of the first of the people in modern times to suggest our feelings are strongly related to our physiological changes in our body. So if someone pokes you, physiologically you feel them poking you, and you got to then process and interpret that. That could be a friend who's giving you a punch on the shoulder saying, good on you, mate. But you could interpret that as they're wanting to dominate or annoy you. And so you've got to process that. And unfortunately, our body can process that very quickly and say, what's happening? Or it can process that, they're feeling, they're wanting to affirm me. This takes time to think through and process what's going on. So whether it's teachers or children or students, it takes time to think about the emotions that we're going through, and it takes time to develop ways of regulating the different emotional responses we have, the positive responses and also the more negative responses. Neuropsychologists identify at least 5 or more stages that are happening in us responding emotionally or in an emotional way. Firstly, there's the trigger, there's the external factor or the internal feeling that we have. And then there are reflexes, our body responds. We feel, that tap on the shoulder was meant to affirm me. I put on a smile, or that tap on the shoulder was meant to annoy me. And then our heart rate can go up if we feel concerned, or it can go down if we feel relaxed. And then we consciously process what's going on, and that takes time. We've got to think about what's going on. And then we've got to communicate what we feel. You've tapped me on the shoulder. You're wanting to get my attention. And then we develop emotional regulation skills. Someone taps me on the shoulder. I don't turn around and hit them over the head or something. I say, thank you for reminding me I need to do this. So we go through this series of events. There's a trigger takes place. A student says, thank you, or a student says, be quiet, in rough words, and we've got to respond to that trigger mechanism. And then we've got to realise that some students are going to feel unsupported, neglected, lonely, sad, and they're going to respond in negative ways. Other students might feel more positive. They come from a positive environment. So there's trigger events, set things off, and then different things are going off in the head and the body. So these reflexive emotional responses include both the body, heart pumping, breathing deeply, whether it be the student responding to something that's happening or us responding. And so if a teacher feels threatened, then our brain sends, pump the heart quickly, get ready, restrict the blood vessels, no blood to the brain, you don't need the brain now, get ready for something. And so things are going on in our body when things are being triggered, or if it's a nice response, we're thinking positively. And then unconscious ideas are coming through, biases are coming through, and we begin to think through what's happening, how should we respond? And we decide, oh, I'm not feeling positively about the student. I'll walk over to the other side of the room. I'll take a few breaths. I'll walk back. I'll think through what that student said. I'm concerned about what's the best response here. Maybe they need time out. How can I say nicely, you need to take time out, move over to the timeout corner, get refreshed. And then we begin to communicate. It might be one-on-one later. We talk through with the student what led you to lose your temper, to yell, what was going on. There are things going on at home. And so we talk through that. And we exude empathy and care. And we say, yeah, I understand there's tough things at home, but you can't turn around and biff one person to the left and hit one person to the right and pour paint over the person in front of you and water over the person behind you. That's disruptive to the classroom. And so we talk through with them, and then eventually they develop emotional regulation skills. We develop emotional regulation skills. Daniel, classroom's not always a smooth and easy place. How do we develop skills as teachers for emotional regulation, as students for emotional regulation? How do we develop a better understanding of this whole part of our being, emotional, which is not only positive and cheery, but it also includes all of these fight and flight, defense, I feel threatened responses? How do we handle this, Daniel?
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently, and I think I talked about this with some students actually, in terms of self-regulation. And I think I was talking about it with those students in the context of in their own classrooms, teaching their own students, particularly in the early stages, what self-regulation might look like. You know, you've got a trigger. You know, what kind of physiological response might that have? You know, you wouldn't use that kind of language with the kindies or year ones, but okay, what do I feel? What's something I can do now to say in my head, or what's something physical I can do? You know, close my eyes and, you know, take deep breaths, count to 10. What's some positive self-talk I can have to help regulate my emotion here? But I think the really critical thing that we've touched on is that it's not just students that need emotional regulation. It's teachers as well. And, you know, as you've pointed out, Sam, classrooms can be a stressful place. As teachers, the reality is that we are going to have students that will be difficult to work with, who will push our buttons. And the reality is, I think we can probably all think back to a time when we may have been misbehaving in school, or perhaps we saw someone misbehaving in school. And when you see a response, you go further. It's like, you know, for those of you who are younger siblings, you might hear from your parents, if you react, they'll keep doing it. right? And so part of the importance of self-regulation as a teacher is, in many ways, it's actually modeling to your students, both in the good times and in the bad times, maybe in the times where they're trying to get a rise out of you, modeling to them what calmness and self-regulation actually looks like. And it's also really important for you in the sense that you don't want to be reacting to your students in a way that you don't want to be. You don't want to be coming from that ultimate place of fear or anger where you might be interacting with them in a way that runs contrary to how you would like to be reacting to them. So self-regulation is really, really important. And I think the way that I have seen it, I think in my own career and with particularly early career teachers, is we talk about the different responses. Often is the freeze response is, oh, I'm not quite sure what to do here, so I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna do anything in that. I think breaking out of that is difficult. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to recognize it as soon as it happens and go, okay, all right, I've got a freeze response right now. That's all right. What I'm going to do is, rather than just standing here and be afraid and kind of just, crumpling in and being scared to do anything with the class, I'm going to say something positive to myself. I might do something physical to kind of snap my brain out of it. People like to kind of flick their wrist or something there. And then you can respond to, once you've flipped that in your brain, you can respond to whatever situation is happening in that classroom that might be triggering you as well. So it is so important, Sam. We need I would like to be able to do that more often than I say. But it is so important.
And I like what you say about think something positive, say something positive. So there's a freeze, there's a difficult situation. And so we think something positive. This is just 1 minute out of 60 minutes of an hour. This is just one student out of 20 students in the classroom. This is just one part of the day. There's plenty more going on. And so we can take a few steps sideways, snap out of the freeze and say, hey, but we've got a lot of other things we're going to do today, not just this one moment of trouble that's happening here. Class, let's look at these great things we're going on, and then while we're doing that, we're processing how we're going to handle this one little bit of trouble that we got in the corner here. And so you move on with the positive things. And that's part of just what we learn over time, how to respond to the 19 well-behaved students. And while we're thinking about the one out of the 20 that's not so well-behaved. So we're continuing today to look at all of these different areas of ways of knowing. And we're seeing that emotion is one of the important ways of knowing that often gets buried. We've talked about language, we've talked about observation, we've talked about science and maths, but emotion is another important field of knowledge. It's another important way of knowing instinctively, intuitively. We can feel bad, we can feel good. These are ways of knowing about what's going on, and they can be overlooked if you're wanting to just be serious all the time. You can respond with humor at times, but you've got to be careful with that. But that can be a very great response, as when you go see the funny side of it, and you might even say, we'll all see the funny side of this. Someone broken a glass, spilt something or whatever. We'll all see the funny side of this in due time. So emotion sits alongside all of these other subjects that we've looked at so far. And so you might be able to think of the ways you can instinctively react to these different emotions. So students and Daniel, so this one down the bottom left, what's happening there, Daniel?
You'll have to forgive me, Sam. I don't have the screen shared at the moment.
That's what has, here we go, share screen.
There we go.
It's all there.
Hopefully, I think everyone might have seen it
on their recording, because it's
we might be all good. We might be all right.
Yes.
Even if not, we've had very terrific discussion.
And there are various various emotional ways we could describe that, isn't it? Yeah. So Daniel, on the left-hand side, and students there, we've got some examples of emotions. And so what's happening in this bottom left-hand picture there?
I actually view this as a little bit of a Mona Lisa type thing. Either very happy and pleased to see me, or I've
Yes.
said something really stupid and she's giving me a sarcastic smile.
Isn't that interesting? A couple. And then the top right-hand corner, what's happening there?
Definite surprise or
Yeah.
shock. So yeah.
And then the bottom here, we've got unhappy. And then this one here on the top left, that's a bit of a challenging one.
Yeah, depending on how I look at that,
Yeah.
it's either anger or I could even view it as someone's giving me a pep talk.
Yes, yes.
Like almost before a sporting match or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Certainly they're trying to show power and authority, and you may even step back a bit because you give them room to show their authority and power and let them say their thing, because as you say, it could be attacking you, or it could be just trying to put forward a point. Now, scientists observe that we have mirror neurons in our brain that fire so that when someone acts in these 4 different ways, it triggers us to respond. And this teaches us how to play sport. This teaches us how to speak. So the mirror neurons try and replicate what's happening. And so they have a functional role in recognizing emotion and trying to feel what's happening. And we could think about these 6 emotions, and each one you look at, you feel inside some sort of response as it triggers emotions inside. And I encourage the students, think about what each of these 6 feel like. What are the emotions in each of these? What do they trigger? What's going on? And then also think about in the classroom, when a student gets angry, when a student gets sad, what's it trigger inside? Because the mirror neurons, they're firing inside in order to get us to recognize what's going on, and we often respond. Think about this story. A man goes for a ride in an aeroplane, unfortunately falls out of the aeroplane. How do you feel? Fortunately, he's wearing a parachute. How do you feel? Unfortunately, the parachute doesn't work. How do you feel? Fortunately, there's a haystack. How do you feel? Unfortunately, there's a pitchfork. How do you feel? Fortunately, you missed the pitchfork. How do you feel? Unfortunately, you missed the haystack. So, Daniel, do you feel some emotion as you?
It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, I think there's the roller coaster of relief and then fear, but I would say I would probably rephrase fear and maybe call it trepidation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe even a class, a student spills some water on someone and you think, oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
And then you realize they're both smiling. That's not so bad. And then you think they might tell their parents, that's bad. So maybe a classroom has those. But I think the point we're trying to make in the first part of this lesson is that understanding emotions is very helpful for teachers. So get to know your emotions. Maybe keep a diary. I encourage students to keep a diary every day, every week. Write down, particularly in your first year of teaching, your first 3 or 4 years of teaching, write down what happened, how do I feel, how could I have handled that better? And so when things don't go so well, then that's a learning experience. Cheer yourself up. You can learn something great about that. When things go well, then write that down as well. Now, Robert Plutnik says that there's somewhere between 5 and 8 basic emotions. And so there's some positive emotions like joy and trust and hope. But then there are other emotions that are meant to trigger a get ready for action. There's things happening. It's a bit like the dials on your car. When it says petrol's almost empty, that's meant to trigger something. Now, if it says petrol's almost empty, you don't have to panic and start walking. You just need to take that into account. And so if a student says, something horrid like shut up to you as a teacher, then you don't have to immediately take that personally. you can start to process that through. The student has got something happening there. And so it's like the petrol gauge on your car. You know, something's happening, start to measure it. Something's happening into the students' dials that are telling them that they want you to be quiet. Something's happening to the dials in your head. You're wanting to react in certain ways. So look at the dials, understand what's happening. So Robert Plutnik says that these parts of the wheel have core feelings at the center, which is where the strongest emotions are happening. And then moving out, there are the other emotions that flow out from this. So at the center, you've got a strong feeling of joy and ecstasy, admiration and trust, and anticipation and interest. So you got these positive emotions that you begin the day with after a coffee, saying some positive things, and a couple of students say positive things to you. And you feel optimism, you feel loved, you feel valued. I encourage you, write them down, encourage yourself with those. And then you go into the classroom and you discover someone scribbled something annoying, and then you get a bit angry as you think about it more, and then you fly into a rage. Something's a bit boring, and that moves towards loathing. You're sad about people not appreciating all the effort that you've done. And so there are other negative emotions as well. And as we begin to understand them, that you are not your emotions. We might say, Johnny is angry, or the teacher, Sam, is angry. You are not just angry. You are a person who's feeling a certain measure of anger. And so we have to realize it's a something on the dial that's saying there is some sense of anger, which is indicating there are some stimuli towards anger, and you should take that into account as you think through what is happening. And so the important thing is to be able to identify the positive emotions, to be able to identify joy and trust and hope, and even feed them into yourself. Think about those, and then also recognize when the negative emotions are happening. They're meant to be warnings. They're meant to stimulate, hey, there's some response needed here, so that we don't go on with the anger, the fear, the sadness that the student is feeling. And a student could be bored, things happening at home, stimulating negative emotions. We've got to take that into account and respond at some stage. Hey, sometimes someone says you're being emotional. We often interpret that negatively. Someone says you're being logical. We often interpret that positively. Why is that? What sort of society do we live in that says you're being emotional? That's negative. Get rid of that. You're being logical. That's absolutely wonderful. Give us lots more of that. Do we live in an age that is all focused on logic, just values the logic? Is studying history, is this an unusual age that we live in that's focused on the material and the logic? Daniel, as a learned historian?
Cool boy. What a question. I would hesitate to say that any age, with some exceptions, but to say that any age is an age of reason or an age of logic. And I think certainly, even in just thinking about this, we mentioned at the start of the lecture, for example, the idea of thinking with emotion has negative connotations. That being said, I think there certainly has been a rise in popular discourse, certainly in marketing and social media, about the importance of being in touch with one's emotions, of maybe, even not necessarily, speaking emotionally, but potentially thinking with emotion as well. But I don't know that it's really, I don't know to what extent, and I don't think it stems from any kind of academic or psychological foundation so much as it springs from a more holistic, maybe even, I don't want to use this negatively, but almost like a new age kind of sense of, be in touch with one's emotions and oneself, and almost in a broad kind of brushy way. And I think that, I will be honest and say, I think that the message in that is actually really good and really positive message. And I wonder if pairing that with, I think, our understanding of psychology, of physiology, as well as probably the fact that, as we talked about, God has given us these emotions for a reason. So I think we've got all these, I'm hesitant to say that we live in an age of X or an age of Y, but we've got all these kind of disparate sources that may influence or um, uh, inform our understanding of emotions, kind of floating around, and sometimes they're concentric and they cross over. So I think ideally I'd like to see, I think that, a well-rounded understanding of emotion would be one that kind of takes these sources together, like I talked about, but there are different sources. And so I don't know if we're necessarily in an age of emotion, but we're certainly in an age in which there is a multitude of sources and ideas concerning emotion. Yeah.
And I think probably with the Enlightenment and with that emphasis on the value of rationalism, and also with the Protestant Reformation, we have this recognition of the value of reason and logic. And there's a move away from authoritarian ways in which a person can be emotional and stir up the revolution, and we need to present the evidence. So I think there is a lot of benefit of living in an age in which the logical is valued and the emotional is at times questioned. But we have in recent years, as you said, 20 or 30 years or more, recognised the importance of a return to some recognition of the value of the emotional. Soren Kierkegaard, back in the 1820s to the 1850s, said that we do need to recognise the emotion is part of who we are, and also the subjective is part of who we are. And he said part of the danger of the very time in which we live is that we're removing all emotions, and therefore we're removing all humanity. Heidegger, in Being and Time, also said there's a danger of removing all humanity by removing the emotional. So it is a big discussion that scholars and historians are aware of. And the answer, I think, is that we need both. We need logic, but at the same time, we need to recognise that emotion is present and it's not entirely negative. In fact, emotion is an important part of who we are. And so we want to encourage the students not to squash down their emotions or not just to let them run wild. We want them to recognise them. So here's a few hints. One is develop an emotion vocabulary. Take times to talk in your class about the value of emotions. This is a school and a class that values every part of the human being, including thinking, including logic, including evidence, but also we value your emotions. If you feel sad, if you feel bored, if you feel angry, come and talk to us one-on-one afterwards, and we will give you a safe space to explore and express all of the reasons for emotions, because we see that as valuable. In creative writing, encourage students to write about their emotions. Do you sometimes feel angry? Do you sometimes feel full of joy? What caused you to feel this way? Draw an emotion, draw peaceful emotions, draw angry emotions, and then understand that you can move from one to the other. When you're feeling angry, take a breath. Why not shift the mind to the peaceful emotion and leave the anger to another time? Some people say we all have to express our anger, but why not say 4 o'clock to 4:30 Friday, that's when I'll run around and say, I am angry at this, I'm angry at that. And then you can say, I'll now put this to one aside and I'll feel cheery for the next 6.5 days. And next Friday at 4 o'clock, that'll be my opportunity to express. I'll ring Daniel up, send him an email and say, I'm angry about this, I'm angry about that. Now I've dealt with it. Can we chat again in 7 days' time? And I'll express. So we've got to understand that we are in charge of our emotions. We're in charge of how we feel. Uh, Talk through conflict resolution. You know, a student might say, I feel I'm being picked on. I feel I'm being bullied. Talk it through. Think, what are some of the strategies that we could work through? So use the wheel of emotions as a teaching tool for dealing with conflict. Mindfulness is the idea that thoughts of the past can worry you, thoughts of the future can worry you, but if you're just sitting in the moment, there should be nothing to worry you too much. You're just here, you're in the chair, you're standing up. And so mindfulness is being in the moment, in the cheery space. And so the wheel of emotions and other emotion tools, and you can Google classroom ideas for working with emotions. You could download flashcards and you get the students to even act out and think through what's it feel to be loved, to be disappointed, to be worried, to be hurt, to be cheerful. You can use an emotions thermometer where you can look at the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, at the end of the day. And what are some things you can do when you feel angry? You can count to 10. You can think about things not so bad. You can say, teacher, can I have some time out? You can go to the timeout space in the corridor or the back corner. You can sit on the squishy cushion. You can squeeze things. You can take a nap. You can practice some techniques for dealing with anger. And so you've got all of these different ways of responding, and it's important that we learn to understand emotions and then learn to respond to emotions. So strategies for incorporating emotional learning in your classroom include mindfulness, clarity that thought leads to feelings and feelings leads to thoughts, that they're a cycle and you can choose where you go in that cycle. Model persistence, determination, self-understanding, self-control. Listen with empathy and emphasize the positive emotions like gratitude and joy. So there's lots of resources that you can practice, including mindfulness, including compassion, caring for yourself, planning ahead as a teacher, asking students to plan ahead as students. Practice changing your mindset from the negative, feeling down, to the positive. Things are okay. Breathe. Don't feel overloaded. Embrace the stress. The fact that students are responding is a positive thing. What are your thoughts, Daniel, when things get tough, when you feel a bit down about yourself? What's the best way to respond?
Yeah, a psychologist friend of mine was telling me that there is a healthy amount of stress, that in some way, shape, or form, we all need a little bit of just that's a little bit of stress to keep our brain a little bit nimble and recognize, all right, there's something I'm going to have to do, or there's some way I might have to approach a problem or think about something. I don't like to recognize that truth, but it makes sense. I wish the healthy amount was zero. I think one thing that I've probably talked about with my students is I think recognizing your limits is really important. And I think this will come into play certainly in terms of juggling work and study, and especially with prac and placement. And so having a particular calendar or a timetable is really useful, because I find that so much of my stress is coming from the mental gymnastics and the mental organizing I'm trying to do. Whereas if I put it out there on a calendar or an organizer, or even just if I've got good thoughts for a class, I'll write it down in my notepad rather than trying to remember it and think, oh yeah, what was that thing? The thing I was going to do, that sort of thing. Because the more you can get out of here and onto paper, the better, because you're carrying less around with you. And so I think that's my kind of key advice. Give your brain less stuff to do so that when inevitably, events happen, when there are things that need, triggers that might occur, your brain has the energy and the agility to adapt to that, because it's not carrying around so much to start with. Don't do the, still feel those emotions. Like, don't, when I say put everything on the calendar, we're not, scheduling our 4 o'clock anger time on a Friday or something like that. But I find that to be a big help. The less cognitive weight you have to carry, the better.
And I like that idea. You could even vent on paper. I suppose you'd have to be careful who sees the piece of paper, but you could vent in prayer or on paper, and you can say, "Oh, that person makes me so angry." And if you've got someone you can talk to, like I've got Daniel here, I can say, "Daniel, this makes me so angry." And then also have a positive gratitude diary where you say, there's 3 students just don't like me, but there is 17 students who are positive, and this student said something positive and that person said something positive. So do practice mindfulness, do practice self-concern, care for yourself, prepare and plan ahead, overcome anxiety. Don't get stuck in the whole anxiety area. Develop emotional intelligence for yourself and for others. And emotional intelligence, just like we've got mental intelligence, emotional intelligence understands emotion, interprets emotion, is aware of what's going on socially. You can develop that over time, just like you can develop other forms of intelligence. So I encourage you to do that and to work with your emotions. We all experience emotions, joy, acceptance. We all experience sad emotions, and all teachers will have negatives. We have individual variation in which some people are more cheery, some people are more task-oriented, some more person-oriented. And so we've got to understand the personal differences and personality differences. The Enneagram recognizes that some people are head thinking people, some people are heart feeling people, some people are gut reaction people. The head thinking people might just look at the information. Those who are heart thinking people might have ideal romantic ideas, want to help. Others who are gut reaction people just respond to whatever's going on, whether it be perfectionism or protecting or peacemaking. So recognize there are differences. Can we put on masks and hide our emotions? I guess to some extent we may. To some extent we have to. We've got to be cheery. We've got to be positive. We've got to look as though we're in self-control. We've got to look as though we know it all while we Google the answers. So you've got to show a positive emotion. Which comes first, the cheeriness or the challenge? The little bird says, I don't sing because I'm happy because I sing. And in some ways, you can make yourself happy in the most difficult circumstance if you switch positive. We all have emotional responses. We go to read the response to our exam results when they're put up. We've got arousal. This is what you're talking about before about stimulus. Stress stimulates you. What result have I got? And then we get the result and we feel certain ways. If we get low results, it motivates us to try harder. If we get high results, we say the effort we put in. So emotion does stimulate us, and it leads us to feel fear or anger, etc. But the big question in the theory of emotion is which often comes first. Ironically, the body often jumps ahead. William James said, often your body runs ahead of you. Someone says to you, shut up. A student says that to the teacher, and you feel, oh, the student doesn't like me. They're having a go at me. They're going to tell their parents, who will tell the admin, who are going to come and give me a lecture. So those 2 words, a body response takes place. This is the end of the world. Carl Lange, a Danish psychologist, had a similar theory, which he said, your body responds. Panic, no blood needed in the brain now. Get ready to respond. Pump blood around the body. Get ready for when the admin come to talk to you. So if a car almost hits a person in this little picture down to the right here, the first thing that happens, your body kicks in, panic, And only later do you think through, how did that happen? Was I too close to the road? And so what we've got to realize is the conscious thinking takes a lot longer, but it's the conscious thinking. Relax, you weren't run over. The person wasn't out to drive over you. The child wasn't out to give you a hard time. So don't invalidate your feelings. The car reacting when you get almost hit, the student feeling a certain way. Do think things through, do give opportunities. I find this such a helpful thing to realize what Lange said and William James said, is that your body may lead you in directions that you're not wanting to continue to go in that direction. It may say, strangle the child. I mean, you won't be teaching for a long time if that's your reaction each time. If you've got 19 strangled children, it's not going to go down well. And so I think body reaction, you've got to know what's happening. So what can we learn from these theories that our body runs ahead of us, Daniel, and that we've got to have built-in responses, built-in thinking?
Yeah.
How do we respond?
Yeah, this goes back to that sense of the importance of self-regulation, in that one of the first steps in self-regulation is being aware of the physical symptoms. So one of my physical symptoms, for example, when I get anxious or stressed, is my chest gets tight. And so I know that when I have that tightness in my chest, I need to do that moment of self-regulation, go, okay, I have tightness in my chest, which means I'm anxious or I'm stressed. What is it that I'm anxious or stressed about? And then I can go into that mindfulness where I can say, well, actually, I don't really have to worry about that's in the scheme of things, that's small. That's a minute here. Or in the scheme of things, it'll be totally all right because I've gone to this particular type of event before and I know what it's all about. I don't have to worry there. I'm going to instead give myself, do something physically positive. So it might be getting up out of my chair and walking, taking some deep breaths, and I'm going to say some positive words over my mind and over myself. But that whole process starts from the fact that the physical symptom starts first. That's the first thing I notice. And so if I can encourage our students watching, maybe take stock of if there's a similar thing that you experience when you feel a particular emotion. It might be when you're angry, you are balling up your fists. And so recognizing those physical symptoms, those physical signs, is really important to being able to kind of cut off that potentially a negative spiraling of emotion, cut that off at the track. You want to recognize, I think the first thing, you want to acknowledge the emotion. You don't want to shut it down and say, I don't feel that, because you are feeling it. Acknowledge it, acknowledge why you're feeling that way, and then start to speak positive and do the positive physical things to help regulate that emotion.
And I think as well, recognize the problem if you stay in the negative, and recognize the benefits if you move to the positive. Because if you want to build this up, student says, you're stupid, or shut up. And if you want to just stay there and battle this out for the next 30 minutes, I'm not stupid, I'm the teacher. I mean, where's that going to lead? It's not going to really help anything. I mean, they've made up their mind what they're thinking. You know who you are. You're not going anywhere down that train track. But if you move to the positive, the student can think what they want. I've got 19 students here I'm working with. I've got things that are happening. If you move to the positive, put on the happy face. I love what you say. Walk, breathe, think positive. I mean, that train track will take you to a good destination. When you think positive, you walk positive, you breathe positive, only good things down that train track. Don't stay with the negative train track. So recognize the body is going to react. It's going to send a mix of emotions. You've got to then choose what you do with those. So do validate your feelings. I like that. affirm, give opportunity to talk things through, journal, work it through, and recognize what's happening. So if you want to find out more, you could look at the theory of emotions. There's some great things happening there. One of the things I really like are the subjects that allow us to deal with emotions. And these are subjects like the arts, the humanities, the culture, drama, music. I mean, you could do some drama. You could act out a drama. How do you feel when this happens? You could act out some Shakespeare, some Julius Caesar, or Much Ado About Nothing, or one of those great dramatic plays. Just take a few lines in it. And how do you feel when things go that way? The word liberal arts means free, being free to think. And I think there's something about the freedom that we have. Back in 2,000 years ago in Rome and Greece and Hebrew culture and other cultures, they had this as part of your education. You would not only learn about logic, you'd learn about rhetoric and grammar, and you'd learn not only about science as the way of knowing, you'd learn about music and astronomy and about the whole of life that's going on. That was part of training. You'd do physical education, you do wrestling in the gymnasium, all of that. Your language studies are part of learning about emotions. And I think in the classroom, when you read poetry, when you read a poem, this is all about emotion. Aristotle, when he said, when you seek to deliver a piece of writing or a speech, certainly you use logic and evidence. But if you watch Parliament, you can see it's all about emotion and pathos. They don't speak nicely about one another in Parliament, do they? They reckon you can win points that way. And also, Aristotle said it's all about character. And I hope in Parliament there's some character going on there as well. In advertising, you mentioned before, Daniel, so much of it is about emotion when you turn the telly on. So you've got logic, which is what Aristotle said, you do need to convince by logic, but you've also got character. You need to show that you've got character. And that's what you as a teacher are doing. You're showing you've got credibility, you understand emotions, you control your emotions, you can switch off negative emotions, switch to positive emotions, and then you recognize the importance of emotional appeal, like a football coach as well. Ethos is this ability to understand character. So it goes beyond emotion, but it's the core of one's being. And then pathos is understanding feelings that are deep within. And so when it comes to music, I think music is very much about the emotional, isn't it? Feeling joyful. That's why we sing positive songs. And then there can be sad songs as well. Dance can be emotional, expressive. And so many of the arts are emotional. And advertising is emotional. We see it all around. It's important to acknowledge. Someone tries to sell you a car, it's probably emotional. You need a new car. You need milk. Superman drinking milk. You need the acne treatment. And art, you step into an art gallery, often it deals with the whole person. It deals with the emotions. And so this Survivors is all about protecting a group of people there. A picture could be worth 1,000 words. So in art, we're seeking to communicate through pictures that which is emotional. This is Pablo Picasso. He's got a doctor who's showing logic and a nun who's showing spiritual care, but water, drinking. And then Pablo Picasso later was asked to paint a picture that depicted the Spanish Civil War. And you can see here he's trying to show emotion in this. So emotion is an important part of reality that we live in. God has made us as people who can experience emotion. Daniel, what do you think of art, music, poetry, literature, as a way of helping students to understand emotion as part of the real world that we live in?
Yeah, I think it's critical because I think ultimately art and literature and music are essentially reflections of the human experience. There's this notion that I think when humans create these expressions, there's this notion that there is something that we want to communicate or produce that cannot adequately be done by words. And so there's something beyond mere words. There's some kind of inner emotion or feeling or conviction that needs to be presented in such a way beyond just the mere words. And so, in terms of the importance of art and literature and music, these are representations of the human experience that contain fundamental grapplings with life, with fundamental grapplings with our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions and how we interact with the world, how we understand the world, how we understand our place in it. And I think we all have that experience where we've read a book or we've watched a film or we've listened to a song, and there's something about that text that is significant to us. There's something about that text that engages with us. And I often say to literature students in particular, when you think about the films that you remember, chances are you remember those films not because of how great the special effects were, or how awesome a particular scene was. As a whole, you tend to remember films that have two things: great story and great character. And what drives story and what drives character is the engagement with human conflict and human emotion. And so we see in texts, I think, a mirror of the things that we are trying to deal with. And so texts, music, literature, art are critical tools because they can help us explore some of the things that either we can't adequately articulate with words, or maybe are so deep in our subconscious that we've never realized that they're there. And seeing that text makes us confront that in beautiful ways, in difficult ways for the first time.
And it certainly communicates with all that we are. We are spirit beings, we're emotional beings, we're embodied beings. We are confronted with the mysteries of life. There is a saying or phrase, the human condition. And the human condition includes that capacity to do amazingly good and so much better and more than we could think. People can show great care and concern and sacrifice for one another, but there is also the human condition that can do so much worse and so much that is bad for one another. Vincent van Gogh is an artist who sought to convey the more of reality than just the reality. And so Starry, Starry Night is seeking to show that there is more going on in the heavens, more going on in the earth, to capture something of the spiritual and the emotional. And in each of his paintings, he's trying to show that there is way more going on. And I think great literature and great artwork and great poetry and great music, as you say, you remember it because it touches the very depth of who we are and the very depth of our being. And so in a school, we want to acknowledge our students as not just those who are learning mathematics, those who are learning logic, but complete whole people who are filled with joy and sorrow, filled with high moments and difficult moments. That's what I love about being a Christian, in that it acknowledges the fullness of who I am and even the inexpressible about who I am. Further thoughts on this, Daniel?
I think that's such a poignant note there, is that, I think as a second teacher in particular, when you get into the secondary years, you might have students that you taught in 7 to 10, but you're no longer teaching because they're not a history student or they're not a science student or something like that. And I think that's, at least from that perspective, I think that's such a really good thing to think about is students are far, and we as people are far more than what we're doing, what we're studying. We are creatures with a complex array of hopes and dreams and fears and emotions. And so I think that point links back to exactly what we've been talking about through this lecture, in the sense that emotions are a fundamental part of who we are. We are in a classroom, we're in an academic environment, but it's so much more than that. It's not just the academics. It's about our hopes and, our passions and our emotions and our drives. I think that's such a critical thing to remember.
And it reminds us that students come into the classroom, there's a past, they've got a whole history of 5 or 10 or 15 years. And if we show interest in that, if we say, tell me about your family, your interests, and they've got dreams, and we say, tell me about your dreams, and we show interest in those. And then if we have times where they can write about their fears and write about their hopes, then that'll be very helpful as well. And so it's important whether we give opportunities to reflect on stories or poems and songs. You could actually Google the 10 greatest stories or songs or poems. You could think about what makes the great stories that have been written. Stories are powerful ways to wrestle with what's it mean to have hope. What's it mean to have fear? I mean, Moby Dick and the whole thing of the whale. Every one of the great stories that we read face the great fears that we all face. So storytelling is important because it triggers these fears and hopes that people are wrestling with. And you can talk through with students these emotions of fear and hope, what's happening there. In an organisation like a school, you could talk through with other teachers what gives you hope and what do you fear in a school, because every organisation has fears and hopes. We live in a society, and politics have fears and hopes. Actually, one of the things I really like in terms of story writing, have you ever come across the 6-word story? And in this, you just write down 6 words that tell a story. And if you want to pause this, students, and write down 6 words that tell a story, I encourage you to do that. Look at this one that Hemingway put forward: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. I mean, immediately there's a story there. Why are there baby shoes? Why are they for sale? Why were they never worn? So this is Hemingway's challenge. Write down 6 words. Her name was never mentioned again. He reluctantly tasted his own medicine. Born a twin, graduated, only child. I knew she knew my secret. Who are you? Mum asked again. Cold fire, abandoned tea, door ajar. A dog, old shoe, sad story. Tired of following, she must lead. You are valued, loved, choose carefully. So each week, this shows that you can tell a story that can touch on emotions of fear and disappointment and hopes as well. We could reflect on songs like Candle in the Wind. She lived her life like a candle in the wind. Marilyn Monroe, and then you have the more recent application to Lady Diane. Silent Night by Bill Crosby, The Birth of Jesus, and then The Cross of Jesus. Whitney Houston. It's Now or Never, Elvis Presley. And so each of these great songs have something about them. Even the poem, No Man is an Island Entire in Himself. This touches on these deep, hard to wrestle with aspects of what it means to be. We all want to be an island in some ways, but we can't be an island. Every country wants to be an island, but it can't be an island. And so poems touch on the deep emotions. If by Rudyard Kipling, if you keep your head when all around you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master. So this poem by Rudyard Kipling touches on what it means to be a teacher, when there'll always be, out of 20 students, 2 or 3 that aren't going to absolutely think you're wonderful. Out of 20 teachers, not all of them are going to think you're wonderful. And so Rudyard Kipling would have been wrestling with his challenges that he faced, as every human being, every poet, every person wrestles with. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, I thank whatever gods may be. Black as the pit, pole to pole. In the felt clutch of circumstance, I've not winced nor cried aloud under the bludgeoning of chance. My head is bloodied but unbowed. I mean, we all face these situations, but we can remember, I'm master of my fate, captain of my soul, as teachers. And so he was diagnosed with arthritis, tubercular arthritis at age 12. He wrestled with pain for his whole life, and then he faced real challenges in life. We can read the Bible, we can read Pilgrim's Progress. People face challenges all the way through life. So if you're a teacher, if you're a human being, you're going to face stories like those that we read, where every human being faces disappointment, every human being faces hope. Daniel, how can story and literature help us face the disappointments of life and keep cheery, keep positive, even though there's going to be difficulties in the journey of life?
Yeah, I think from a very base standpoint, they're entertainment. So they give us a sense of escapism. They give us something that we may not experience in our own lives. But I recall the words of famed film critic Roger Ebert, who said that with regard to film, he said that film is like a machine that generates empathy. And so not only does it help us, I think, understand the struggles and give us a little bit of a glimpse into the lives and the hopes and dreams of others, it provides us as well with a template. We see in these characters, we can identify with these characters, these narratives, ways that we ourselves can approach conflict, ways in which we can approach tests or difficult seasons, and we can learn from this. You know, literature is a powerful tool to help us navigate the world around us, to help us navigate trials and tribulations. So apart from being entertainment and escapism that helps us by virtue of, escapism, it gives us a blueprint as well.
And for us as Christians, we can look to the Bible, the Word of God. You begin with Adam and Eve, but then you face the challenges that follow, and then 2 of their children fight each other and one kills the other. Noah has a dream for his family, and yet the world seems to have gone crazy, and he builds an ark. Abraham presses ahead, but there are challenges. And then just the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, Joseph has a dream and has a Technicolor dream coat that he puts on, but he ends up thrown into a jail and a pit, and things aren't so bad, but he pushes through with his dream. And then the end of Genesis, there can be people who mean things not for good, for evil for us, but God has good intentions for us. God gives his Spirit. And the whole of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, includes that message. Life includes some tough times, but God has good purposes, and he includes strategies there of wisdom, strategies of hope, psalms of disappointment and hope. All of these scriptures can encourage us. And so today we've looked at emotions and the reality of emotions. Today we've looked at ways of developing an understanding of emotion in the classroom. We've looked at practical responses when we feel like getting a bit more expressive than we should. Let's walk across the room. Let's breathe. When our students feel like being more expressive than they should, we can teach them strategies to understand emotions. And then in each of our humanities subjects, art subjects, music subjects, every subject, we can encourage a greater understanding of emotions and their role in our lives. Any final points, Daniel?
No, I think that's a good way to a good way to wrap up, Sam. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, students. I look forward to engaging with you more. I encourage you, keep a journal if you can each day, each week, write down some strategies, develop some ways of teaching your students about emotions and how they can be more responsible in their response to emotions, how they can develop emotional intelligence. And I look forward to hearing the positive narratives that you can tell about ways in which you've grown in self-understanding and those strategies that have helped you. I look forward to catching up again next time. So thank you. It's been a joy to be with you again. Thank you.